Hello and welcome back to my video series on solving the mystery of dualism. This is the fifth and final video. I just wanted to remind you that the material that I'm covering in this video series is basically a synopsis of that which you'll find in my book, Evolving Towards the Truth, a Guide for Searchers. And you can find links to my book at my website, jeffkosmosky.com, or you can find the book directly at amazon.com. As you might recall, I've been making the claim all along through this video series that what's been preventing man from solving the mystery of dualism are these two epistemological hurdles. The first hurdle had to do with an incorrect view of physical matter, and we said that we should view this activity as being of an electromagnetic nature. The second hurdle we encountered in the previous video had to do with an incorrect view of the self, and I made the claim that we need to have a more enlightened view of what the self actually is, and we're going to address that in this video. To get beyond this second epistemological hurdle, I'm going to make a number of claims or contentions. The first contention: there is no experiential self. There is a self. It's a complex, pluralistic, multi-componential society. However, there is no singular Cartesian self. There is no experiential self, no self of experience that does nothing but have experiences. Essentially, David Hume was correct. There's no evidence for an experiential self. To get beyond this second epistemological hurdle, we have to acknowledge that qualia can be self-expressing. Experience can happen sans experiencer. The alternative, as we saw, leads to this logically untenable infinite regress. The main implication of this is that because there is no I of experience, and because all there is are the qualia, we could effectively say that I am qualia. Epistemologically, our evolved brains and minds prefer to think that experience requires an experiencer, and that there is a self that has experiences. I'll talk about why we prefer to think this way shortly. My second contention: qualia effectively are electromagnetic activity. When we performed the thought experiment in the last video, we made the implicit claim that the electromagnetic activity occurring in our reporting neurons couldn't possibly be the same thing as our qualia. We felt inclined to presume that this electromagnetic activity needed to be converted into qualia, something that we could actually experience. As tempting as it might be to accept this, we saw that it was the first step into the infinite regress. I contend that this electromagnetic activity is the same thing as our qualia. Neurologically speaking, this activity in the reporting neurons is the end of the causal road. There's no neurological evidence for any further downstream converters in the brain that monitor or read this electromagnetic activity and then produce some new kind of output someplace else in the brain. Further, this electromagnetic activity is adequately mysterious and sufficiently complex. There's no justification for claiming that it needs to be further converted into qualia. So again, this electromagnetic activity is equivalent to our first-person qualia. There's a rather interesting consequence or implication of this idea, and I'll address this shortly as well. My third contention: the infinite regress is epistemological. It's a consequence of the way we think and the way our minds evolve to think. Epistemologically, we prefer to think that experience requires an experiencer, and this is why. It has to do with the way the mind thinks about the self. Basically, the mind thinks about the mental self as if it was like the physical self, only invisible. And it does this because one of the mind's key intellectual modules thinks in analogies. It works on metaphors and likenesses. When it encounters some new phenomenon, or in this case tries to determine what the self is, it's actually trying to determine what it's like. And the mind, which is actually more of a society of different modules, one of which is this likening module, tends to liken itself to the only real model available, the physical self. I elaborate on this in greater detail in my book and consider the evolutionary aspects of this likening module. But this likening module starts out by making the incorrect assumption that the mental self is like the physical self, that it's rather monolithic and singular. It presumes that the mental self engages and has sensations, just like the physical self engages and holds objects in its hands. As it does, it also remains separate from the physical object. However, as long as the mind insists on viewing itself as separate from the experience or different than the experience, its only recourse is the dreaded infinite regress. Okay, now my fourth and final contention: I am electromagnetic. Earlier I said that at the moment of experience, I am qualia. I also said that qualia are the electromagnetic activity coursing about the columns of reporting neurons in our brains. If the quote-unquote metaphysical I of experience is essentially qualia, and qualia are electromagnetic, we have to acknowledge that at the moment of experience, the alleged metaphysical I is electromagnetic. What I find interesting about this conclusion is that it has some interesting parallels with Hinduism and Eastern thought. Basically, they claim that the self is an illusion and all is one. I go into this in greater detail in my book, but the bumper sticker version of this idea is the well-known mantra of Om. I am one with the universe. If we acknowledge that electromagnetic activity pervades the entire universe, and that I am electromagnetic, well, you're basically forced to accept a very similar conclusion. That is, I, the mental self, is of the same stuff as the entire universe. I am electromagnetic. I am essentially one with the universe. Om. So this wraps up my video series on solving the mystery of dualism. To summarize, we were initially trying to answer the question, how does neural activity produce qualia? Given that we should now accept that this neural activity is electromagnetic in nature, and that there is no imagined experiential self to experience them, I think we've built the explanatory bridge across the chasm of dualism. Once again, I apologize for going through this material as quickly as I did, but you can find it covered in greater detail in my book, Evolving Towards the Truth, A Guide for Searchers. I'm Jeff Kosmosky. Thanks for watching.